Hearts of Shadow. Valentine's Day wasn't supposed to end like this. It started with roses, laughter, and a reservation at a new, exclusive restaurant called Amour Noir. It wasn't one of those places everyone talked about on Instagram. It didn't even have a website. I only found out about it because my coworker, Derek, swore it was the most romantic spot he'd ever been to. "You'll thank me later," he said with a wink. The perfect place for an unforgettable night. Unforgettable. That word haunts me now. I'd been dating Rachel for about a year, and this Valentine's Day felt important. Like the one where I could show her how serious I was. She loved romance and surprises, and Amour Noir seemed like the perfect choice. The directions Derek gave me were vague, but I figured it was part of the mystique. "Just head down Ridgeway Road and take the turn where the lantern glows red," he'd said. It sounded cheesy, but Rachel loved quirky things like that. We arrived around 8 p.m. The night was cold and quiet, the kind of February chill that gnawed at your bones. I parked near an old, wrought iron gate marked by a single lantern glowing crimson. The road beyond the gate was dark, lined with skeletal trees. "This is atmospheric," Rachel said, her breath fogging in the air. "Trust me," I said, though I was already questioning the choice. We walked through the gate, following a gravel path that twisted deeper into the woods. The lanterns, spaced far apart, cast dim pools of red light. Finally, the restaurant appeared, a grand, Gothic building that seemed to rise out of the earth itself. Its stone facade was covered in ivy, and its windows flickered with warm, golden light. It was beautiful in a haunting sort of way. Inside, the atmosphere was stunning. Candles glowed on every table, casting long shadows across the high, arched ceiling. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music weaving through the low hum of conversation. The maitre d', a tall man in a tailored black suit, greeted us with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Welcome to Amour Noir," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "Your table awaits." We were seated near a massive fireplace, the flames crackling and dancing in the hearth. Rachel was delighted. She leaned across the table, her eyes sparkling. "This is amazing, Ethan. How did you even find this place?" "A little magic," I teased. I didn't tell her about Derek. Something about this place made me want to claim the discovery as my own. Our waiter arrived with a menu written in elegant calligraphy. The dishes had names like Heart of the Forest and Crimson Delight. Rachel ordered the Amour Noir special, and I went with the Eternal Flame. The wine, a deep red vintage, was complimentary. Tasted rich and heady, almost too perfect. "I think I could live here," Rachel joked, swirling her glass. I laughed, but something about the wine made me uneasy. It left an aftertaste I couldn't quite place, metallic and sharp. As the evening went on, the room began to feel off. At first, it was subtle. The candle flames seemed to flicker in unison, as if caught in a shared breath. The string quartet's music, once soft and romantic, grew discordant, the notes twisting into something unfamiliar. And then there were the other guests. When we'd first arrived, the dining room had been full of couples, smiling, whispering, holding hands. But now, as I glanced around, their faces seemed pale, almost waxen. Their movements were stiff, their laughter hollow. One woman's head lolled unnaturally to the side, her eyes fixed on her partner with a vacant stare. "Ethan?" Rachel's voice pulled me back. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said quickly. "Just tired. This wine's hitting me harder than I thought." She smiled, oblivious to my growing unease. "It's strong, but it's so good. Let's toast to us." I clinked my glass against hers, but I didn't drink. Our food arrived on silver platters, unveiled with dramatic flourishes by the waiter. Rachel's dish was a vibrant red, garnished with delicate petals that looked suspiciously like dried blood. My Eternal Flame was a dark, seared piece of meat, almost blackened. The smell was intoxicating, but as I cut into it, I noticed something strange. The meat wasn't cooked, it bled. "Rare. Just how you like it," the waiter said, his voice sliding over me like oil. "I ordered medium," I said, my throat dry. He tilted his head, his smile widening. "Our chef is an artist. You'll find it to your liking. I stared at the plate, the blood pooling around my fork. Rachel, meanwhile, was devouring her meal with enthusiasm. This is incredible, she said. Ethan, you have to try it. I'm not that hungry, I lied, pushing the plate away. The waiter's smile faltered, and for a moment, his expression was something else entirely. Cold, predatory. But he said nothing, merely retreating into the shadows. After dinner, Rachel excused herself to the restroom. I sat alone, staring at the fireplace, trying to shake the creeping dread that had settled over me. The flames seemed to twist and writhe, forming shapes. Faces, I thought, screaming silently. I blinked and they were gone. When Rachel didn't return after 10 minutes, I started to worry. I got up, weaving through the maze of tables. The other diners barely acknowledged me, their faces slack and unmoving. The restroom door was ajar, the light inside flickering. Rachel, I called, stepping inside. The room was empty. No Rachel, no sign of her. That's when I heard the scream. It echoed through the building, sharp and guttural. I ran back into the dining room, but it was empty now. The guests, the waitstaff, everyone was gone. The candlelight had dimmed, the shadows pooling thick and black. Rachel, I shouted, my voice bouncing off the high walls. The scream came again, this time from somewhere below. I followed it, my heart hammering in my chest. A door near the kitchen stood ajar, revealing a staircase that spiraled into darkness. I hesitated, but then I heard her voice. Ethan, help me. I didn't think, I just ran. The basement was a nightmare. The walls were lined with crimson drapes, and the air reeked of iron and decay. In the center of the room was an altar, and on it lay Rachel, her wrists and ankles bound with red silk. Her eyes were wide with terror, her lips trembling. Ethan, she whispered, they're coming. Before I could reach her, the shadows around the room shifted. Figures emerged, their faces obscured by dark hoods. The maitre d' stood at the front, holding a dagger that gleamed in the dim light. Love is sacrifice, he intoned, his voice reverberating through the room. And tonight, we honor the bond of blood. Stay away from her, I shouted, lunging forward. But the shadows seemed to come alive, wrapping around me, holding me in place. Rachel's screams pierced the air as the dagger descended. I don't remember how I escaped. When I woke up, I was lying on the gravel path outside, the cold seeping into my bones. Rachel was gone. The inn was gone. I tried to tell the police, but there was no record of a Mort Noir. Derek claimed he'd never heard of it. I searched for months, scouring every lead, but it was as if the place had never existed. Now, every Valentine's Day, I find a note slipped under my door, written in elegant calligraphy. Love is sacrifice. She will return when you do. And every year, I hear Rachel's voice in my dreams, calling for me from the shadows. The blood of roses. Valentine's Day always carried a kind of pressure, didn't it? You're supposed to make it perfect. A day carved out for love, passion, and shared moments. This year, I was determined to impress Claire, my girlfriend of 2 years. She loved surprises and had a soft spot for anything unconventional. So, when I found an online ad for a secluded Valentine's Day retreat called the Crimson Rose Inn, I booked it without a second thought. The website promised a romantic evening full of old-world charm. The pictures showed candlelit dinners in antique dining halls, floral arrangements that practically spilled out of the frame, and cozy rooms with 4-poster beds draped in velvet curtains. It looked perfect, maybe even a little too perfect. But I figured Claire would love it, and it was only a 2-hour drive from the city. I picked her up at 5 p.m., handing her a bouquet of roses as she slid into the passenger seat. "Where are we going?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. "It's a surprise," I said, grinning. She playfully rolled her eyes, but I could see the excitement bubbling under the surface. That's what I loved about Claire. She trusted me, even when my plans seemed a little harebrained. The first hour of the drive was uneventful, filled with music and light banter. But as we left the highway and turned onto a winding country road, the atmosphere started to shift. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving us cloaked in an eerie twilight. Fog rolled in, thick and white, wrapping around the car like ghostly fingers. "This is remote," Claire said, peering out the window. "That's the point," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "It's supposed to be romantic." But even I couldn't ignore the way the trees seemed to close in around us, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky. The GPS announced, "You have arrived," just as we reached a wrought iron gate. A sign hung from it, swinging gently in the breeze. The crimson rose in. "See," I said, trying to mask my unease. "Told you it was real." The gate creaked open as we drove through. The inn loomed ahead, a sprawling Victorian mansion that seemed to have been plucked from the pages of a Gothic novel. Its windows glinted like dark eyes, and the porch lights cast long, flickering shadows. Claire shivered. "It's beautiful, but kind of creepy, don't you think?" "It's just the fog," I said, though I felt it too, that creeping sense of wrongness that tickled the back of my mind. Inside, the inn was exactly as advertised. The lobby was filled with antique furniture and heavy red drapes, and a massive chandelier sparkled overhead. A woman stood at the reception desk, her dark hair pinned into an elegant bun. She wore a deep crimson dress, the color so vivid it looked like fresh blood. "Welcome," she said, her voice smooth and lilting. "You must be Ethan and Claire. How did you?" I began, but she cut me off with a smile. "Reservations, of course," she said. "We've been expecting you." Claire and I exchanged a glance, but neither of us said anything. The woman handed us an old-fashioned key with a brass tag that read room 14. "Dinner will be served at 8 p.m., she said. "Do enjoy your stay." As we climbed the grand staircase, I couldn't shake the feeling that her smile had lingered a little too long. Our room was stunning. The four-poster bed was draped in crimson velvet, and a vase of deep red roses sat on the nightstand. Claire immediately began snapping pictures, gushing about how authentic everything felt. I tried to relax, but something about the room felt stifling. The roses especially unsettled me. Their petals were so dark they were almost black, and they exuded a sweet, cloying scent that made my stomach churn. "Ethan, you're being weird," Claire said, flopping onto the bed. "This place is amazing. Stop overthinking everything." She was right. I was overthinking. Shaking off my nerves, I joined her, and for a while, it felt like a normal Valentine's Day. We laughed, drank the complimentary wine, and got dressed for dinner. But then things started to go wrong. The dining hall was nearly empty. There were only 3 other couples, all seated far apart at their own candlelit tables. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music hauntingly beautiful. The woman from the front desk, who now introduced herself as Madame Violette, served us personally, bringing out dishes that were as elaborate as they were unrecognizable. "This is duck, right?" Claire asked, poking at her plate. "Of course," Madame Violette said, her lips curling into that same unsettling smile. I took a bite, but the meat tasted strange, metallic, almost. I decided to stick to the wine, which flowed freely throughout the evening. Too freely. By the time dessert arrived, I was feeling dizzy. Claire's laughter seemed distant, as though she were speaking through a thick pane of glass. My vision blurred, and the room seemed to tilt. "Ethan?" Claire's voice cut through the haze, sharp and panicked. "Are you okay?" I don't... The words caught in my throat. My chest tightened, and the room spun violently. I reached for Claire, but my hand felt like lead. The last thing I saw was Madame Violette's smile as darkness swallowed me. I woke up to darkness. The sweet scent of roses was overwhelming now, mingling with something far more sinister, the coppery tang of blood. My hands were bound, my wrists raw from struggling. Panic surged through me as I realized I was lying on a cold, hard surface. A table? Ethan? Claire's voice, trembling and weak, came from somewhere nearby. "Claire!" I struggled against my restraints. "Where are you? Are you okay?" I don't know," she sobbed. "We're in some kind of basement. There's blood everywhere." My stomach lurched. The sound of footsteps echoed, slow and deliberate. A figure emerged from the shadows. Madame Violette, her crimson dress now streaked with dark stains. "Ah, you're awake," she said, her voice as calm as ever. "The ritual is so much better when the participants are conscious." "Ritual?" My voice cracked. "What the hell are you talking about?" She didn't answer. Instead, she raised a long, curved blade, its edge glinting in the dim light. "No!" Claire screamed. "Please, don't. Love requires sacrifice," Madame Violette said, her eyes gleaming. "And tonight, the roses will bloom." I thrashed against my bonds as she moved closer, her expression serene, almost reverent. The blade hovered over my chest, and I braced for the pain. But before she could strike, a deafening crash echoed through the room. The door burst open, and the other couples from the dining hall stormed in, wielding knives, axes, and other makeshift weapons. Their faces were blank, their eyes vacant. "Help us!" I shouted, but they didn't respond. They were chanting now, their voices rising in a haunting, rhythmic cadence. Madame Violette smiled. "Ah, the roses bloom indeed." The last thing I remember is the feeling of cold steel against my skin, and the sound of Claire's screams. When I woke up, I was alone in the woods. The inn was gone. Claire was gone. All that remained was the scent of roses and the faint echo of that terrible chant. No one believed me when I tried to tell them. The police found no trace of the Crimson Rose Inn, and Claire was officially listed as a missing person. But every Valentine's Day, I find a single black rose on my doorstep, and I hear her voice whispering in the wind, "The roses will bloom again." Valentine's night gone wrong. Valentine's Day was supposed to be special. This year, Evan had planned a surprise date, something unforgettable, as he put it. We'd been together for 3 years, and while he wasn't the most romantic guy, he always found ways to make me feel special on days like this. That evening, he picked me up in his car, a beat-up old sedan that I secretly loved because of its quirks, and handed me a single red rose. "You're going to love this," he said, flashing his boyish grin. "Where are we going?" I asked. "It's a surprise," he said, winking. "Just trust me." The drive was uneventful at first. We passed through the city, lights twinkling in the distance, and then onto quieter country roads. I noticed the sky was overcast, the moon barely visible behind the clouds. Evan had the radio on low, some soft, generic love songs playing in the background. Everything seemed perfect, until it didn't. About an hour into the drive, I realized we were in the middle of nowhere. The paved road had given way to gravel, and the trees on either side of us seemed to close in, their dark silhouettes looming like silent sentinels. Evan," I said, glancing out the window. "Where exactly are we going?" He smirked, but there was a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. "It's just a little further. I promise it'll be worth it." I wasn't so sure. The further we drove, the more isolated I felt. The radio started to static, and eventually the music cut out entirely. Evan fiddled with the knobs, but it was no use. "It's fine," he said, forcing a laugh. "We're almost there." But there turned out to be a small, abandoned-looking building in the middle of a clearing. It was a diner, or at least it used to be. The faded sign above the door read Sweetheart's Cafe, but most of the letters were chipped or missing. The windows were dark, and the paint on the walls was peeling. "This is it?" I asked, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. "It's not what it looks like," Evan said quickly. "It's part of the experience. Just wait." I didn't argue. I trusted Evan, even if this place gave me the creeps. He grabbed a picnic basket from the trunk and led me inside. The inside of the diner was surprisingly clean, given its dilapidated exterior. The tables were still set with red checkered tablecloths, and there were vases of fake roses on each one. A single candle flickered on the counter, casting long shadows on the walls. "See," Evan said, gesturing around. "Romantic, right?" I smiled, even though the place still felt off. "Sure, romantic." He set up the basket on one of the tables and pulled out sandwiches, chocolates, and a bottle of wine. For a while, I forgot about the eerie setting. We laughed, reminisced, and toasted to another year together. But then I heard it. A faint sound, like footsteps, coming from the back of the diner. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Hear what?" Evan asked, pouring another glass of wine. "Footsteps," I said, glancing toward the kitchen door. He frowned. "It's probably just the wind. This place is old." I nodded, trying to brush it off, but the sound came again. This time it was louder, more deliberate. I froze, my heart pounding. "Evan, someone's here." He stood, his expression serious now. "Wait here," he said, moving toward the kitchen door. "No!" I grabbed his arm. "Don't go back there. It's probably nothing," he said, trying to reassure me. "Just stay here." I watched as he disappeared into the kitchen, the door swinging shut behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. And then he screamed. I jumped to my feet, my blood running cold. "Evan!" I shouted, but there was no response. The sound of his scream echoed in my ears, and I hesitated for what felt like an eternity before finally pushing open the kitchen door. The room was empty. No Evan. No signs of a struggle. Just rows of rusted appliances and empty counters. "Evan?" I called out, my voice trembling. And then I saw it. A trail of wet footprints leading to a door at the back of the kitchen. The prints were smeared, as if someone or something had been dragged. I didn't want to follow them. Every instinct told me to turn around, to run. But I couldn't leave Evan. Swallowing my fear, I stepped forward, the floor creaking beneath me. The door led to a staircase descending into darkness. A faint, sickly sweet smell wafted up from below, making my stomach churn. "Evan?" I called again, my voice barely audible. No answer. I pulled out my phone, using the flashlight to guide me as I crept down the stairs. The smell grew stronger with each step, and I had to cover my mouth to keep from gagging. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in what looked like a basement. A wide, concrete room filled with old furniture, broken glass, and something else. In the center of the room was a large wooden table, and on it lay Evan. I rushed to his side, tears streaming down my face. "Evan, wake up." He didn't move. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling, and his skin was cold to the touch. I shook him, screamed his name, but it was no use. And then I noticed the carvings. They were etched into his arms, his chest, his forehead. Symbols I didn't recognize, their lines jagged and uneven. Blood seeped from the wounds, pooling on the table. "What the hell is this?" I whispered, my voice breaking. A low, guttural laugh echoed from the shadows. I spun around, my flashlight trembling in my hand. "Who's there?" I demanded, though my voice betrayed my terror. The laugh grew louder, more menacing, until it felt like it was coming from every direction. And then, from the darkness, she appeared. A woman, or what used to be a woman. Her skin was pale and stretched tight over her bones, her eyes sunken and black as coal. She wore a tattered red dress, and her lips twisted into a cruel smile. "Happy Valentine's Day," she hissed. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my phone. "What do you want?" I screamed. She tilted her head, studying me like a predator sizing up its prey. "You came to my diner," she said. "Now you'll stay forever." The lights flickered, and the room began to spin. The walls seemed to close in, and the air grew thick and suffocating. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The last thing I saw was her face, inches from mine, her cold breath on my skin, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying in the middle of the clearing, the diner nowhere in sight. Evan was gone. My phone was dead, and I had no idea how much time had passed. I called the police, but they didn't believe me. They said there was no diner, no Sweethearts Cafe. They said I must have imagined it. But I know what I saw, and every Valentine's Day, I dream of that woman in red, her laughter echoing in my mind. The Valentine's dinner that wasn't. It all started with a reservation at the Crimson Rose, the most romantic restaurant in town. Sam had been dropping hints for weeks, and I knew he was planning something big for Valentine's Day. We'd been dating for 2 years, and while I wasn't expecting a proposal, I couldn't shake the feeling this night was going to be special. The restaurant was infamous for its exclusivity. You didn't just book a table there, you had to be invited. Sam had somehow managed to snag one of their coveted reservations. It felt like the perfect setting. Candlelit tables, the faint scent of roses, and a string quartet playing soft, haunting melodies. When we arrived, the hostess greeted us with a warm smile. "Welcome to the Crimson Rose, Mr. and Ms. Taylor," she said, as if she'd been expecting us all along. She led us through the restaurant to a private alcove at the back. It was secluded, cozy, and dimly lit by a single, flickering candle. The table was already set with a bottle of wine and a small, heart-shaped card that read forever. Sam grinned as he pulled out my chair. "I told you I had a surprise," he said. "How did you even get this reservation?" I asked, laughing. "You must have pulled some serious strings." He shrugged, looking pleased with himself. "A little persistence goes a long way." The evening started off beautifully. The food was exquisite: lobster ravioli for me, filet mignon for Sam. We laughed, clinked glasses, and reminisced about how we'd met. For a while, it felt like we were the only people in the world. But then things started to feel off. It began with the waiter. He was tall, pale, and had an unnervingly hollow look in his eyes. When he first approached our table, I noticed his hands were trembling as he poured the wine. He didn't smile, didn't say a word beyond the basics, and his voice was barely above a whisper. "Everything okay?" I asked as he placed our desserts on the table, a pair of chocolate soufflés shaped like roses. He froze, staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. For a moment, I thought he was going to say something, but then he just turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. "That was weird," I whispered to Sam. "Maybe he's just nervous," Sam replied, though he didn't sound convinced. "Come on, don't let it ruin the night." I tried to brush it off, but the atmosphere in the restaurant felt different now. The once cozy candlelight seemed too dim, the music too slow, almost mournful. The other diners, all couples, sat silently at their tables, their faces expressionless as they ate. It was as if the warmth and liveliness from earlier had been sucked out of the room. "Do you hear that?" I asked Sam, leaning closer. "Hear what?" I hesitated. I wasn't sure how to explain it. It was a faint sound, like whispering, just beneath the music. At first, I thought it was coming from another table, but the whispers didn't sound like words. They were more like hisses, layered on top of one another. Sam shook his head. "You're imagining things." Maybe he was right. Maybe it was the wine or the dim lighting or the way the shadows seemed to move in the corners of the room. But then I saw her. She was sitting alone at the table across from us, a young woman in a red dress, her dark hair falling in loose waves over her shoulders. She was beautiful, but there was something unsettling about her. She wasn't eating or drinking, just sitting perfectly still, staring straight at me. "Sam," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Do you see her?" "See who?" "The woman in red. Over there." I nodded toward her table, but when I turned back, the chair was empty. Sam frowned. "You're really starting to freak me out, Lily. Maybe we should go." I nodded, suddenly desperate to leave. The room felt oppressive, the air thick and heavy. But as we stood to leave, the waiter appeared again, blocking our path. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice low and cold. His expression was blank, but his eyes were filled with something dark, something wrong. "Yeah, we were just—" "You can't leave," he interrupted, stepping closer. "Not yet." Sam grabbed my hand. "We're leaving," he said firmly, pushing past the waiter. But as we moved toward the door, the other diners began to turn their heads, one by one, to look at us. Their faces were pale, their eyes empty, and their mouths twisted into unnatural smiles. I clung to Sam, my heart pounding. The whispers were louder now, filling the room, surrounding us. I couldn't understand the words, but I could feel their malice. When we reached the door, it wouldn't budge. Sam shoved his shoulder against it, but it was as if the door was sealed shut. The hostess appeared behind us, her smile eerily calm. "I'm afraid you can't leave," she said softly. "Dinner isn't over yet." "What the hell is going on?" Sam demanded, but she didn't answer. Instead, she gestured toward the dining room. I turned and froze. The room had changed. The walls were no longer adorned with romantic decor. They were cracked and covered in black mold. The tables were gone, replaced by long wooden slabs stained with something dark and red. The other diners were no longer seated. They stood in a circle around us, their faces twisted and grotesque. And at the center of the room was the woman in red. Her dress was tattered now, her hair wild, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She raised a hand, and the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening. "Why are you doing this?" I choked out, barely able to speak. Her lips curled into a smile. "You came to us," she said, her voice echoing. "You accepted our invitation." "No, we didn't," Sam shouted. "We just wanted dinner." Her laughter was cold and hollow. "And now you'll stay. Forever." The lights flickered, and the walls seemed to close in. I screamed as the circle of diners moved closer, their hands reaching out. Sam grabbed me, pulling me toward the door, but it was useless. The whispers returned, louder and more chaotic, filling my head until I thought I would burst. When I woke up, I was lying on the sidewalk outside the Crimson Rose. The restaurant was dark, the windows boarded up. Sam was gone. My phone showed it was 2 days later. I called the police, but they didn't believe me. They said the restaurant had been abandoned for years, that no one could have been inside. But I know what I saw. I know what happened. And every Valentine's Day, I still hear the whispers.